The worst deaths ever discovered by prehistoric humans.
Sound like a broken record to state the fact that humans as a whole have experienced an abundance of pain, which might not be that surprising considering that pain pretty much comes with the territory of life.
Right.
But in some areas, one can argue that we've experienced more than other animals thanks to our very own creativity, let's say. And this problem of suffering and misery is not just exclusive to we modern humans, but rather extends to all humans, i.e., all species that belong to the genus Homo, who have sadly been lost along the way. And while no one can fully agree on the amount, it appears that the number of Homo species to have ever existed sits at around 14, all of who, minus us, have popped up and then disappeared within the last 2.8 million years or so. Now we, Homo sapiens, have been around for about 300,000 of those years, which in a general sense can seem long.
Chat, pretty much the next stage of humanity after this, you know how you've seen like the previous ones, is we're pretty much just going to turn into cyborgs. And then that's about it.
When you compare it to the whole 3 million years of the Homo genus, then you suddenly realize that it's really not. And when you think about just how long 3 million years is, you can start to imagine how much different the world of our ancient ancestors and cousins was compared to ours, which in turn means different experiences, different pains, and different deaths, some of which can literally not be recreated today. And not just because what killed them no longer exists, but sometimes because they involve unbreakable achievements, as seen with this first specimen, who is for now the oldest known murder victim ever. This skull may look a bit like yours or mine, but it isn't, as it doesn't belong to a sapien, but rather a Homo heidelbergensis, a species or subspecies of archaic humans that existed during the Middle Pleistocene. And if it wasn't obvious, this particular individual has, or had, a major problem. And actually two.
The hole in the skull.
The giant holes in their head.
Right.
It was clear to researchers who found this unfortunate fellow in a Spanish cave that the holes were what had killed them, and would have done so pretty quickly, causing a catastrophic head and brain injury. The only question is though, what caused them? Given that caves are sloped, and in many cases have plenty of sharp points, scientists first thought that a fall had taken out this heidelbergensis, during which a sharp rock had pierced his noggin. But if that actually was the case, you would not expect there to be two identical holes, and thus making the scenario unlikely. The next assumption was that it might have been an animal. But the problem with that is that there's no animal in Spain during the time that made anything remotely similar to such injuries. Which then led to the last hypothesis, as there was one thing that it did resemble quite a bit. Something that the anthropologists are all too familiar with, and that's injuries from human tools. Specifically, the marks looked a lot like those seen from stone axes, which can cause severe blunt force trauma, and suggesting that this person had been murdered. And given that they were done in about 430,000 years ago or so, they are now considered the oldest case of murder or homicide so far. And
what? Imagine being the ancestor of the person. You gotta please rocking up your door. Yeah, we heard about your great, and it goes on. Grandpa actually murdered someone. So we're charging you with the crime, buddy.
Demonstrate that violence may have been a part of our history before we even existed. And surprise, surprise, it also turns out that this heidelbergensis was not alone in death, as thousands of other Homo bones were found in the cave too, with a few of them showing signs of having been domed as well. Yet none were as old as this particular specimen. And the current belief is that this cave may have been the oldest examples of a designated burial site, where people who died from virtually anything were tossed into, be it a violent death or not. And in the case of our poor friend, this early violence could have been the result of a fight over resources or territory, resulting in him having been offed in the end. So overall, not a great way to go, but arguably much better than what happened to this guy.
To be fair, if they found thousands of like bones in that cave, then surely that was just like a dumping cave. So they obviously kill people, loads of people, and then just threw them in the cave.
Who is dubbed OH7. Now OH7 was not a heidelbergensis, but rather a Homo habilis, one of the oldest human species which lived in South and East Africa. And in addition to being one of the oldest, they were also one of the smallest humans ever, with individuals only being around 4 feet or 1.2 meters tall, resulting in them being very, very fragile, and making life challenging for them from the get-go. But in the case of OH7, life, or rather death, wasn't just challenging, it was downright unfair, and is another case of a death that is no longer possible. And not
Bro, it's not lose size. I'm 6'5".
Because he holds any first-time achievements, but instead because he was killed by something or some things which no longer exist. extinct animals. This individual in life would have lived in an ancient wetland area where a variety of predators thrived. And it seems that one day, while out for a drink, he was attacked by one of the worst things you could possibly run into.
Alligator.
A crocodile. And a giant one at that. And not just any old giant crocodile, but rather the largest true crocodile species to have ever lived.
Oh
the
my God.
Thorbjornarsoni, a now extinct species which could crack 7.6 meters or 25 feet in length while weighing over 2 tons.
Yo, imagine that coming at you. Jesus, that's huge. How did that die out?
So in other words, a very unfair matchup for our little ancient relative. Based on the remains, it appears that the crocodile had ambushed OH7, who had managed to quickly turn away, but was caught at the last second, as his left leg bore massive puncture marks. There were also parts of his leg that were completely missing, implying that it had been torn clean off in the attack, which in a hot mucky wetland was basically a death sentence, even if you didn't bleed out. And yet, Mother Nature still deemed this not to be punishment enough, as in one of the rarest cases known, it seems that he was then attacked by a second, completely different predator, a feline, specifically a leopard-sized one. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it was definitely a leopard that made up the tag team duo, but whatever did attack him, attacked the back of his head, leaving long grooves in his parietal bone, which does align with a leopard's hunting strategy, or at least a closely related Panthera species. And just if it wasn't—
Hey, that's one unlucky man. That's one unlucky man. No, not only have you just been attacked by one of the biggest crocodiles ever, you're also attacked by a leopard as well.
clear, OH7
GG's.
unfortunately died, as both marks on his head and leg showed absolutely no signs of healing. Now, I will say, it is technically possible that he died first from the crocodile attack and then got picked apart by a feline, but because the croc only took one leg, and because the damage from the feline was in a spot that is associated with predatory behavior, some think it really was a dual attack. And it's hypothesized that after getting attacked by the croc, he may have turned to face it while trying to fight back, leaving his back wide open to a nearby feline,
Oh
and
my
thus
God.
spelling his doom. And for what it's worth, even today, on multiple occasions, crocs and felines have been observed fighting over an animal. However,
Really?
thankfully, the animals involved today do not include an extinct feline and a massive, never again seen sized crocodile. So this death surely must have sucked. But remember, it's not—
Mate, imagine being that person. Oh man, nah, mate, it's bad enough anyway. It's bad enough anyway, but at least you might get out the crocodile's mouth somehow. You're gonna have a missing leg, but nah.
not always the violent demises that are the most painful. Take Exhibit A, for example. This is KNMER 1808, a 1.7 million year old Homo erectus from Kenya, who had a troubled history with A. Not the letter, but the vitamin A, which, while being an essential vitamin, can be harmful in large amounts. And too much of it is what apparently killed our Homo erectus friend over 1 million years ago. And trust me—
Oh, wait, over 1 million years ago, they was taking drugs. He overdosed on vitamin A. He overdosed on vitamin A?
that's not a good way to go. Her partial skeleton was first located back in 1974, and scientists immediately noted there was something wrong with it, as her bones showed abnormal growth patterns, namely excess bone turnover, and held evidence of long-term massive bleeding. And yet, there were no clear wounds. And while this may sound perplexing and mysterious, it was actually quite straightforward to the researchers, as the bone growth were consistent with what's seen in hypervitaminosis A, aka vitamin A toxicity, a condition that is well known in both ancient and modern times,
What's that?
with this erectus so far being the oldest example of the disease within humans.
Oh,
The patterns in
disease.
her bones suggest that this was a condition that she dealt with chronically, and is what ultimately killed her, despite it not usually being a very dangerous condition in modern times. And presumably, given the lack of medical awareness back then, she was taking in too much without knowing it, which on top of her bone problems would have caused symptoms such as weakness, headaches, sloughing off of skin, the loss of hair and teeth, and a lot of joint pain, which is reflected by her limbs bearing the most pathological bone growth. And it was likely over a long duration of time that she had these problems, which thus begs the question, where did she get all this vitamin A? And the answer is that all signs point to one key suspect: carnivore liver, a well-known source of vitamin A. And in some predators of today, like the polar bear, the liver can store so much of it that it could theoretically supply a human with nearly 150 years worth of the vitamin. And naturally, not knowing this probably played a big role in her undoing. Now, while likely not as painful as this ending, another prehistoric death that definitely would have sucked, simply going off of how scary it sounds, is what happened to the Tong Childs 2.8 million years ago. In today's day and age, if we find ourselves scared by something outside, it usually results in us frantically looking around us, or if in the water, beneath us, but never really up in the sky. And yet, a long time ago, you might have needed to, as large predatory birds prowled the skies and terrorized the lands of Africa.
Wait,
and were
how
not afraid
big?
to take a stab at the occasional human, or rather hominins, which in this case was a seriously unlucky Australopithecus. And despite this breaking the Homo rule, because again it's Australopithecus, I am including it given the sheer uniqueness of the case, as the Tong child was found with horrific injuries to his face and head, including puncture marks to the bottom eye sockets, while the top of his cranium was deeply scratched. And interestingly enough, such injuries are actually fairly identical to what's seen in monkeys today that have fallen prey to eagles, suggesting that a large bird had sunk its beak and talons into the Tong child's eyes.
Wait, how big is the bird? How big is the bird?
And head, likely killing him rather quickly, or at least hopefully, before he was then hauled off to be consumed. But the story does not end here, as his death spawned a new mystery. You see, the Tong child is really just a skull, meaning that the body was never found. And what's more, is that it was located in a remote part of the Kalahari Desert, in a cave, where no other bones were found, be it human or other animals, and thus leading researchers to ask how the skull ended up here, of all places. And this has led to a second hypothesis regarding the specimen, where in death, it, or rather its skeleton, had been used by its attackers to build a nest, before the head eventually became dislodged and tumbled down, which by sheer coincidence ended up rolling into a nearby cave where it would then lie for millions of years before being unearthed once more.
What?
So, with all this said, I bet you'll never look at birds the same way again. But something you're probably already weary of.
Yo, imagine you're walking through like the forest one day or whatever, yeah? You look up into the tree and you just see a bird nest made of bones. They do that? They'll make a bird nest of bones? They got like a bone tent, a bone cabin.
Is water. While necessary to life, it can also cause extreme discomfort, to say the least. And drowning is often ranked as one of the worst ways to go,
Oh, yeah,
which is
100%.
seriously misfortunate, as this might have befell on possibly the entire Homo erectus species, or at least what was left of them. The erectus were one of the most successful human species of all time, and actually the longest lived, having been the first Homo to not only leave Africa, but also colonize Europe and Asia, where in the latter they would make their final stand. And as far as we know, the youngest erectus fossils ever, dating to about 110,000 years ago, came from the island of Java, and strangely enough, all of them perished in a mass death event. To be exact, nearly 100 years ago, a research team on the island stumbled upon a graveyard of over a dozen erectus specimens, who were all adults and were mangled together in one spot.
What?
And given the lack of evidence for disease, physical wounds, or old age, it was presumed that they all had died at the same time from one thing. But the question is, what exactly could have done it?
Probably fighting.
Well, based on the type of sediment in which they were found, it was concluded that a flood was possibly a part of the answer, with the belief being that all the bodies had been swept away by floodwaters down to a narrowing river, where they then ended up getting trapped in a logjam, thus forming a kind of carcass jam, I guess.
Yo, do you reckon in like 500,000 years or so, or a million years, like humans will be in like one of these videos? Well, it probably won't be a video. It'll probably be a braino. Like where you search with your brain. I don't know. However they see this source of information in a million years. Whatever way, futuristic way they're seeing it, yeah? Isn't it going to be weird? Like history time, they're going to be talking about the humans and what we was doing and how dumb we were or whatever. Like, yo, they'll be like, yo, can you remember the humans that had like mobile phones and technology? They struggled to go to space. They had to fly. And nowadays we just teleport everywhere. We go wherever we want in the blink of the eye.
Which eventually fossilized. But this does not necessarily mean that they were killed in said flood, but rather they were just swept away by it at some point. However, for now, it is still believed that a mass drowning was behind the actual deaths.
Wait, yeah, I just want to make an online statement since this video will be online for as long as YouTube keeps it up, which hopefully is when you guys are watching this. Hopefully this is useful history documentation. By the way, if you're reading this, I would really like to be brought back to life as a cyborg. So you better find my body. My name is Lewis Grant and I live in Birmingham, UK. Okay. Find my goddamn body. Dig me up. Okay. turn me into a robot and let me come back because I got some juicy information for you. I ain't going to tell you now because that spoils it. Bring me back to life. I'll tell you. I'll tell you the juicy information. I know the secrets. You see those pyramids that you guys are talking about? You can't. I know the secrets. I know all the secrets. Trust me. All of them. You want all the secrets? They're up here. Bring back to life.
And one more narrowed down idea is the belief that a volcanic eruption in particular was their undoing, as it potentially caused lahar flows, which are cold and hot mixtures of rock and water that run down the slope of a volcano, wreaking havoc and typically overflowing rivers. And we know from modern times that such events can cause widespread local devastation, traveling more than 60 miles and in some cases killing tens of thousands of people. And if
they'll have pyramids figured out then, I got another case. I was once abducted by aliens. You know aliens exist now. I was one of the first people ever on planet Earth. Everybody knows it around me. I'm in the news. You can't find a news source because you're a million years ahead. But I'm telling you right now, I was the first person ever. I made friends. It's a planet you haven't seen yet. I don't want to disclose it because I know you guys are terrible. You guys are destroying the planets, right? I know that. I ain't going to tell you. Bring me back to life. And then I might consider it. I might be on your side, okay? Bring back to life.
If a volcanic lahar really was the perpetrator in killing the last Erectus, then it would be one of the only fossils that we know of that truly shows an extinction event in process. Though it should be mentioned that volcanic eruptions or mass flooding were not the reason why Erectus died out in general, with the main belief being that in Java, the last populations started to wither after its woodland biome started to change into a rainforest.
They already have videos on aliens. Fuck it then. Listen, bring me back to life because I'll be the first human ever to suck your cyborg dick. Okay? You want that? I'm willing to do it. Now bring me back to life as a cyborg, buddy, okay?
Forest. Additionally, it is of course possible and even probable that younger remains of Erectus are out there too. It's just that for now, these fossils represent the final known members, making the whole thing just that much more tragic, yet also poetic. Unfortunately, there's nothing poetic with this next case though, which was just brutal, as it involves one of the worst animals to be taken out by, a hyena, who are known to eat their victims alive and utilize horrific bite and pull methods.
Hey, buddy, you're being eaten. Do something. What are you, bro? You, at least headbutt them. You're being eaten, buddy. Do something.
Which rip away chunks of meat from the victim. Very painful, to say the least. And the hyenas I'm talking about weren't just some modern ones that you'd find on a safari, but rather a now extinct giant one, the Pachycrocuta, who was among the largest hyenas to ever live, with adults sometimes breaking 150 kilograms or 330 pounds, making them rivals to lionesses when it comes to size. And to make matters worse, their weight was not distributed like that of a lion, as they had proportionally massive heads, with massive indentations indicative of powerful muscles, which resulted in them biting down with monstrous forces, allowing them to do things like this. This is a multi-100,000-year-old Erectus skull that was absolutely obliterated by a Pachycrocuta. And it wasn't alone, as this is actually just one of the more than 28 specimens found in the Zhaokutian Peking Man site in China, who met very grisly ends, presumably. You may have heard of the Peking Man before, a claimed subspecies of Erectus who were found within a cave, but you probably didn't know that of the 28 plus specimens, approximately 67% had bite marks which are thought to have come from the Pachycrocuta. And bites is putting it lightly, as multiple Erectus body parts have been found that can only be described as smashed or obliterated, likely from attempts by the hyenas to access the nutritious bone marrow within. Or perhaps just to eat the entire parts of the bone whole. And considering the state of the skeletons, I'd say they were rather successful. Back in the day, given the sheer insanity of the damage, and because man-made tools were also found, it was first thought that the Peking Man had inhabited this cave, and these specimens were rather evidence for cannibalistic murders. However, upon further analyzing all the bones, including the non-human ones, it became clear that at least to some degree, hyenas had been behind this symphony of death, with the current idea being that this cave actually represented a Pachycrocuta den, but at various points after abandonment was also used by mankind, thus explaining the tools. And besides showcasing just how horrifying hyena attacks were, the site has also served as a reminder not to take our apex predator status for granted. because while erectus were major predators for many animals, and even contested with carnivores, it seems that in prehistoric China, they were still not at the top of the totem pole, with that spot going to our giant hyenas. Which especially seems to be the case when considering that many human bones have been found with Pachycrocuta damage, while the opposite cannot be said.
I ain't riding no hyena, bro. I ain't going. They are evil. They are evil. Never liked those things. Since Lion King. Never liked them.
And let's face it, there's not much you can do against lion-sized hyenas, even if you did have a spear. And for what it's worth, there's also the hypothesis that hyenas themselves were for a long time the literal reason why humans were not able to expand into certain areas.
Bro, how did that hyena die out though? Go extinct when it's so dominant? See, that's what I don't understand, chat. You know when you got something that's an absolute beast, like the saber-toothed tiger, yeah? How does it go extinct, bro? Lack of resources, no food. Mad. Like when you're that much of a beast, right?
And even beyond the Pachycrocuta, we know many instances where a hyena took a nip out of a human, including in modern times, as they are sometimes known to become man-eaters. So that's all to say, it really makes me grateful that we at least do not have to worry about giant ones. And something else you no longer have to worry about is not having a toothbrush.
I got a toothbrush, buddy. Got a toothbrush.
Now that probably doesn't seem like a big deal.
Oh wait, we're still at these. I thought the video was done.
But tell that to the Turkana boy, or KNM-WT 15,000, another Homo erectus specimen, as they just really didn't seem to be able to catch a break. But unlike the Peking man, this specimen did not live in Asia, but rather in Kenya. And he lived much earlier too, with his bones dating back to between 1.6 and 1.5 million years ago. At the time, the erectus had already invented some pretty nifty tools, and might have even had control of fire, or at least partially. Yet, what they did not seem to have unlocked just yet was good dental hygiene, as the Turkana boy did not have any major catastrophic wounds, but instead, an interesting pathology in his mouth. To be precise, he showed signs of having formed a nasty abscess, after his milk teeth had fallen out and his molars and premolars had come in awkwardly.
Well, yeah, well, I'm not surprised they ain't got toothpaste and dentists back then. What was it meant to do?
Resulting in the two teeth colliding and damaging the tissues, which ultimately gave way to infection and an abscess that never healed, highly implying that he died from it, and at a young age, as the fallen teeth were baby teeth, and it's thought that he succumbed around the age of 8 or 9.
What?
And based on what we know about present-day tooth infections, it's thought that septicemia is likely what did him in, a nasty condition that occurs when bacteria or their toxins cause blood poisoning, aka sepsis, which even today is quite challenging to treat, and back then was almost certainly a death sentence, as it was in his case as well. Based on the location of where he was found, it's presumed that at some point during his sickness, he fell face first while traversing swampy land, unable to get up due to being already weakened by his ailment, and then ultimately died floating face down in swampy waters. And sometimes really does seem like the universe has it out for certain people, as he couldn't even die in peace, with some researchers believing that not so long after his death, a herd of animals trampled his body into the muddy swamp floor, enough for it to get fossilized. And then meanwhile, sometime later on, a part of his skeleton would end up getting sandwiched in between volcanic ash from a local eruption, solidifying his remains further and creating a tomb that would last for over 1 million years.
What?
And according to some researchers, all these woes were not even the end of the list, as once upon a time, it was thought that the Turkana boy suffered from a congenital condition such as dwarfism or scoliosis, as his ribs seemed to be out of place relative to his spine. But over the years...
Wait, are you sure his ribs aren't out of place because he got trampled? Or was it just like, it was like that anyway?
As technology has improved, it has turned out this may not actually be the case. And during the reanalysis, they made a new discovery, which found that while he might not have suffered from dwarfism or scoliosis, he definitely had suffered from a severely herniated disc that was so out of place that, given the lack of technology back then, might have been a double Grim Reaper, so to speak. In other words, if his mouth infection didn't get him, then his herniated disc would have, causing him to have very little mobility and in no condition to fight off any sort of predator. Which all just goes to make you realize that a lot of first world ailments today used to be death sentences back then.
Yeah, it's
Talk
crazy.
about an eye-opener.
So many things nowadays that are just small things would definitely death sentences back then. But wasn't like the average age like 20 or something? Not even that. Like even not so long ago, like the life expectancy's gone up loads. Gone up loads, man.